This happened back in the late summer of 2024, during a week that was supposed to be a simple exercise in playing Super Dad. I've never been much of a presence at my daughter's school. My job as a project manager usually has me out the door by 6 a.m. and back well after the sun has dipped below the horizon. But that Monday was different. My wife's mother had passed away suddenly down south, and Sarah had to leave immediately to help her father with the arrangements. That left me to hold the fort, and to handle the first week of the new school year for our 6-year-old Hilda. The house felt unnervingly quiet without Sarah there. You don't realize how much noise a person makes just by existing until they're gone. The hum of the refrigerator felt louder. The creak of the floorboards as I walked to the kitchen sounded like gunshots in the morning stillness. Hilda, however, was a rock. She's the spitting image of her mother, dark, inquisitive eyes and a sharp wit that usually makes me feel like I'm the child in the room. She has this way of looking at you, a sort of deep, emotional intelligence that feels a bit too advanced for someone who still loses her socks every 10 minutes. That morning, the sun was already baking the pavement as we walked to the car. The air was thick and stagnant, the kind of late summer heat that makes everything feel slow and slightly distorted. I strapped her into the back seat, and she immediately began her role as my navigator, despite the fact that her school is only 10 minutes away. So, first day of year 2, I teased as I backed out of the driveway. Ready to be the big kid on campus? I saw her in the rearview mirror. She was frowning, her little arms crossed over her chest. It's year 3, Daddy. Honestly. I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. No way. When did you get so old? Next thing I know, you'll be asking for car keys. She didn't laugh back. She just turned her head to stare out the window at the passing suburban houses. After a moment of silence, she said my name. Daddy? Yes, Hilda? I replied. She always does that, calls my name and waits for an acknowledgement before she continues. It's a habit Sarah taught her about being polite, but in the quiet of the car, it felt strangely formal. Was it dangerous when you went to school? She asked, her voice small. I glanced at her again. Dangerous? No, not really. Why do you ask? Because of the dinosaurs, she suddenly shouted, breaking into a fit of giggles. The tension in my shoulders snapped and I joined her. It was such a typical kid joke, a reminder that despite her maturity she was still just a little girl. Very funny, I chuckled. Are you looking forward to seeing your friends? Yeah, she said, her laughter dying down as quickly as it had started. And my new teacher, Mrs. Gibson. My cousin Layla says she's the best. What about your old teacher? I asked, mostly just to keep the conversation going. Won't you miss her? No, Hilda said. The response was immediate. Cold. She was the worst teacher. She didn't like fun. She told me off when I cried when I scraped my knee. I felt a small twinge of guilt. I'd been so busy with work over the last year that I hadn't even realized my daughter was unhappy with her teacher. I made a mental note to be more present this term. Well, at least that's over now, right? I said. Hilda gave me a mischievous little smirk. On the last day of school, I played a trick on her. It was Charlie's idea. We were in the art hut and she went into the big cupboard where the paper is. And I locked the door. I let out a short, surprised laugh. I remember doing things like that when I was a kid, hiding a teacher's chalk or locking a bathroom stall. That's a bit naughty, Hilda. Did she get out okay? That way. Hilda shouted, pointing down the road before she could answer. I turned the corner toward the school, and the chaos of the morning drop-off took over my senses. The street was a nightmare of double-parked SUVs and stressed parents. I had to park 3 blocks away and walk her the rest of the way. The heat was becoming oppressive, the sun beating down on the back of my neck. As we reached the gates, I gave her a quick hug and a kiss on the forehead. Have a great day, kiddo, I said. I will, she chirped, her earlier mood completely gone as she ran off to join the line of children. I stood there for a moment, watching her. She looked so small, so innocent, blending into the sea of colorful backpacks and bright uniforms. As I turned to leave, I found myself stuck behind a group of mothers who had formed a barricade on the narrow pavement with their strollers. They weren't moving. They were huddled close, their voices hushed but frantic. Haven't seen her all summer, one woman was saying, her eyes wide. Her car is still in the driveway. The mail is piling up. I heard Mrs. Baker didn't even show up for the inset days last week, another whispered. The school is freaking out. They've had to get a last-minute supply teacher for the year 2s. A cold finger of dread traced a line down my spine. Mrs. Baker. That was the name on Hilda's report card last year. A friend of mine lives next door to her, a third woman added, lowering her voice even further. She said the police were there this morning. They think she might have just disappeared. I felt the world tilt slightly. My mind raced back to the car ride. I locked the door. I didn't think. I just moved. I pushed past the mothers, ignoring their indignant huffs, and marched back through the school gates. My legs felt like lead. My breathing was coming in shallow, ragged bursts. I walked into the reception office, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Hi," I stammered. The receptionist looked up, startled. "I'm Hilda's dad. She left her favorite coat in the art hut on the last day of term. My wife is frantic about it. Can I go check?" The receptionist offered a sympathetic, tired smile. "Oh, of course. It's the blue building around the back. It hasn't been used for the summer, so it'll be a bit dusty. Here's the key, just lock up when you're done." She handed me a heavy brass key on a plastic fob. I took it, my hand shaking so violently that the keys jingled like wind chimes. The walk to the back of the school felt like a mile. The art hut was a prefab building, a temporary structure with navy blue wooden slats and a flat, felt roof. It sat in a shaded corner of the playground, surrounded by overgrown weeds. The air here felt different, colder despite the sun. It smelled of damp wood and stagnant earth. I reached the door and fumbled with the lock. When it finally clicked, I pushed the door open. The interior was dim. Dust motes danced in the single shafts of light piercing through the blinds. It was silent, that heavy, oppressive silence of a place that hasn't seen life in months. My eyes scanned the room. Stacks of plastic chairs, drying racks, and a large oak desk at the front. And there, sitting right on top of the desk, was a leather handbag. Beside it lay a set of car keys and a half-eaten granola bar, now covered in a thick layer of gray mold. My gaze drifted to the back of the room, to the tall, heavy supply cupboard. The latch was turned to the locked position. "Please," I whispered, the word catching in my throat. "Please no." I walked toward the cupboard. Every step felt like I was moving through deep water. The smell hit me before I reached it. It wasn't just the smell of dust anymore. It was something sweet, cloying, and metallic. A smell that made my stomach heave. I reached out and turned the latch. The door didn't just open, it fell forward slightly as if something was leaning against it. The sound was the worst part. A soft, wet thwack as something hit the linoleum floor. I didn't want to look. Every instinct in my body told me to run, to scream, to vanish. But I looked. She was huddled in the corner of the small, dark space. Mrs. Baker. Or what was left of her. She was curled in a fetal position, her hands clawed as if she had spent her final hours scratching at the wood of the door. Her skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over her cheekbones. Her summer dress, once white, was ruined by the fluids of decomposition. I staggered back, the bile rising in my throat. I didn't make it to the door before I collapsed to my knees, vomiting until my chest burned. Hilda's words echoed in my head, over and over again, stripping away the innocence of the morning. I played a trick on her. I locked the door. I think about the last 6 weeks. I think about the heat wave we had in July. I think about that woman in total darkness, screaming into the void of an empty school, while we were at the beach eating ice cream and laughing. I'm back home now. Hilda is in her room, humming a song and drawing a picture of a house with a sun in the corner. She looks so normal. So sweet. But I can't stop thinking about the way she looked at me in the car. That sharp, intelligent gaze. She knew what she did. She had to have known. I told the police I found the body while looking for the coat. They haven't asked many questions yet, but they will. They'll ask why the door was locked from the outside. They'll ask if anyone saw anything. I'm sitting in the kitchen, staring at the door to the hallway. I can hear her little footsteps upstairs. Thump, thump, thump. I keep wondering, if she could do that to a teacher who wasn't fun, what would she do to a father who tells the truth? The sun is setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the kitchen floor. And for the first time in my life, I'm afraid to be alone in the house with my own daughter. I feel like I'm being watched. And the worst part is, I think I am. This happened back in the late autumn of 2024. I won't say exactly which city I was in, for anonymity's sake it's better that way, but I will say that the city had recently become home to a new, highly controversial museum. It was a private collection, tucked away in a renovated warehouse on the industrial edge of town, entirely dedicated to the history of serial killers. From the second I saw the advertisement on a local forum, I knew I had to go. I've always been what you might call a true crime junkie. While most people are spending their weekends at the cinema or a bar, I'm usually deep diving into police archives or watching documentaries about the psychology of the depraved. There's something about the way these individuals operate, the meticulous planning, the double lives, that has always fascinated me. So buying a ticket wasn't even a question. It was a necessity. The day I visited was a Tuesday, right around 2 p.m. The sky was that flat, bruised gray color you only see in November, and a biting wind was whipping off the river. The museum was located down a narrow side street, the kind of place where the streetlights flicker even during the day. When I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It didn't smell like a typical museum, no scent of old paper or floor wax. Instead, it was clinical. It smelled like a mixture of ozone and heavy-duty disinfectant. The lobby was dim, lit only by small recessed spotlights that cast long, distorted shadows across the concrete floor. There were only a few other people there, a young couple looking visibly uncomfortable and an older man in a trench coat who didn't seem to be moving at all. I checked my coat, took my laminated visitor's pass, and began to walk through the heavy velvet curtains that led to the main exhibits. The atmosphere was perfectly crafted. The walls were painted a deep, matte black, and the air was kept at a constant, chilly temperature that made the hair on my arms stand up. Every footstep I took echoed with a dull thud-thud against the floor. I spent the first hour or so drifting through the more famous displays. They had everything. I saw Jeffrey Dahmer's actual glasses, sitting behind a reinforced glass case. I stood inches away from one of Ted Bundy's hacksaws, the metal looking dull and strangely mundane under the LED lights. It's a weird feeling being that close to objects that have been used for such horrific things. You expect them to radiate some kind of dark energy, but they're just things. Then I came across a display for a killer I'd only read about in passing, Alexander Pichushkin, the chessboard killer from Moscow. He had a vision to kill one person for each of the 64 squares on a chessboard. The display featured a replica of his board and detailed his arrest in 2006. The plaque mentioned how he had claimed to have reached 61 victims and had solemnly sworn to hit the 64 mark before he left this world. I stood there for a long time, staring at that chessboard. Do you understand how absolutely fascinating that really is? The level of commitment required to keep a tally like that. Most people can't even stick to a gym routine for more than a week, and here was a man with a singular, unwavering goal. It was, in a very dark way, inspiring. I found myself admiring that level of dedication. I hoped that, one day, I could achieve that same level of focus in my own life. But as I moved further into the unsolved wing of the museum, the mood changed. The crowds thinned out until I was entirely alone in a long, narrow corridor. The only sound was the low, rhythmic hum of the building's ventilation system, which sounded almost like heavy, distant breathing. That's when I saw it. The exhibit was smaller than the others, tucked into a corner near the emergency exit. The sign above it read, "The No-Name Killer, a Local Enigma." Seeing that name, or lack of one, sent a strange jolt through me. Felt insulting. No-Name Killer. Like I was some kind of amateur. Like the work hadn't been significant enough to warrant a proper title. I felt a heat rising in my chest, a mixture of indignation and fuel. I stepped closer to the glass. They had included several calling cards recovered from various crime scenes over the last 3 years. My eyes went straight to a molded plaster cast of a shoe print, a size 11 rugged work boot. I remembered that night. It had been raining, and the mud behind that suburban garage had been much softer than I'd anticipated. I'd been sloppy. Next to the cast were a few old Polaroid pictures. They were grainy and slightly overexposed, showing various angles of a dimly lit basement. The museum notes suggested they were trophies found in a discarded envelope near a dumpster. I leaned in, my breath fogging the glass. I remembered the exact click of the camera, the smell of the chemical developer as the image slowly bled into view while she lay there, silent at last. But it was the last item in the case that really brought back the memories. A pair of wooden crutches. I felt a genuine smile tug at the corners of my mouth. Those crutches were a stroke of genius. I remembered the weight of them under my arms, the way I'd practiced that slight, pathetic limp for hours in front of a mirror. I remembered the look of pure, innocent sympathy on that pretty young lady's face when I'd asked her if she could help me load a bag of groceries into the trunk of my car. People are so desperate to be helpful. It's their greatest weakness. I stood there, mesmerized by my own history. I wasn't nearly as sloppy anymore, though. Looking back at those crutches, I realized how lucky the police had been to find them. Back then, I think I was just too ravenous. The urge had been so loud that it got in the way of the tidying up. Now, I'm much more surgical. Sir? The voice made me jump. I spun around to find a young museum docent standing a few feet away. He was thin, wearing a vest that was a size too large, and he was looking at me with a concerned, slightly suspicious expression. Is everything okay? He asked. You've been standing at this particular display for nearly 20 minutes. I realized then that I must have looked strange, leaning against the glass, staring with an intensity that went far beyond casual curiosity. I cleared my throat, forcing my face back into a mask of boredom. Yeah, I said, my voice sounding raspy. It's a local case, right? It's a bit more chilling when it's in your own backyard. The docent nodded slowly, his eyes darting from me to the Polaroids in the case and back again. Actually, the police think he's still active. There was another disappearance just last month that fits the profile. It's why we added the exhibit, to raise awareness. Awareness, I repeated. That's good. Very civic-minded. He didn't smile. He just kept watching me. The silence between us stretched out, becoming heavy and suffocating. I could hear the blood thudding in my ears. For a split second, I wondered what it would feel like to have his name on a plaque in this room. Anyway, I said, breaking the tension. I think I've seen enough. I turned and walked away, feeling his eyes on my back the entire way to the exit. When I finally stepped out into the cold evening air, I felt a strange sense of relief. But beneath that was a lingering dissatisfaction. 17. That was my current count. 17. It seemed so low compared to the greats I'd seen inside. I walked toward the parking lot, my boots crunching on the gravel. The sun had gone down, and the industrial park was shrouded in deep, blue shadows. I reached my car and sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the museum entrance. I thought about the no-name label. I thought about the docent's suspicious eyes. And I thought about the 3 empty squares left on Alexander Pichushkin's chessboard. I realized then that the museum hadn't just been a trip down memory lane. It was a reminder. A motivation. I started the engine and began to drive home, but I found myself taking the long way, passing through the quieter, residential neighborhoods where the street lamps are spaced just a little too far apart. I'm still working on those numbers. I have to. Because I know that when all is said and done, when my full story is finally told, I'm going to be far too hard to ignore. And sometimes, when I'm sitting in my living room in the dark, I get the distinct feeling that someone is watching me through the window. But then I realize, it's probably just me looking for my next reflection in the glass. I've been sitting in this same cracked vinyl booth for what feels like several lifetimes, staring at the same vintage Americana posters plastered to the walls. You know, the ones, faded advertisements for motor oil, black and white photos of baseball players who have been dead for a century, and those rusted license plates that are supposed to give the place character. To most people, Applebee's is just a place you go when you're too tired to cook and have nowhere better to be. But for me, it's become my entire world. It's dim, it's depressing, and it smells faintly of old floor cleaner and microwaved grease. If you've ever sat in one of those booths and felt a sudden, inexplicable wave of sadness, you might understand the vibe. It's a place that feels like it's stuck in a loop, and as it turns out, that's exactly what it is. The lighting is low, just bright enough to see the yellow laminate on the table where kids have scribbled their names over the years, but dark enough to hide the grime in the corners. At the bar, there are 2 guys I've nicknamed Dick and Balls. They're here every single day. They never speak. They just sit there, nursing these neon blue dollaritas that never seem to get empty. Every now and then, they'll turn their heads in perfect unison to look at me, their eyes vacant and glassier than the bottles behind them, before returning to their silent vigil. I was pulled out of my thoughts by the sound of swinging doors. "You polished that one off right quick," Cheryl said, sliding over to my booth. "She's the only waitress here. She's got that server mom energy, polite, efficient, but with eyes that don't quite match her smile." She reached down and snatched away my empty plate. "You need a refill on that drink, hun?" "Nah, I'm good, Cheryl. Let's just get this over with," I muttered. My voice sounded thin even to my own ears. "Sure thing. I'll be back out in just a minute." She vanished through the kitchen doors. I hate this place. I hate the fake fancy pub atmosphere and the food that's essentially just expensive TV dinners. I'm not a genius, but I'm not stupid either. I know a Pinto when I see one, even if you try to tell me it's a Porsche. I slammed my fist onto the table out of pure frustration, the laminate vibrating under my knuckles. Dick and Balls glanced over, their expressions unchanged, then looked away. "I'm here because it's better than the alternative." "I've seen the alternative." The double doors creaked open again. Cheryl was walking toward me, holding a large, deep bowl. As she got closer, I heard it, a low, rhythmic buzzing that grew louder with every step she took. It wasn't a hum, it was the sound of thousands of tiny, vibrating wings. She set the bowl down with a flourish, pulling away a white cloth cover like a stage magician. "Oh my, don't that look good," she chirped. Inside the bowl was a writhing, pulsating mass of black hornets. Dozens of them. They were packed so tight they looked like a single, shifting organism. They crawled over each other, their stingers twitching, their angry buzz vibrating through the table and into my elbows. They didn't fly out, they just waited. "You know, you could have some if you want," I whispered, my finger tapping nervously against the wood. Cheryl always watched me eat. Every single time. "Oh, that's mighty kind, but I could never," she said, her voice dripping with full modesty. "That's your dish. It's my job to take care of ya. Go on now," she urged, leaning in. "It's gonna get cold." I felt a whimper catch in my throat. "I'm working on it, just give me a minute to appreciate the food, okay?" I knew staring at it wouldn't make it disappear. I took a deep breath, my heart hammering against my ribs, and reached into the bowl. The sensation was immediate, hundreds of tiny legs prickling my skin, the vibration of their bodies making my hand go numb. I scooped up a handful of the insects and shoved them into my mouth. The pain was white-hot. As I chewed, the hornets that weren't instantly crushed drove their stingers into my tongue and the roof of my mouth. I felt them sliding down my throat, stinging the soft walls of my esophagus all the way down. My eyes flooded with tears. I reached for another handful, my throat already beginning to swell. Some of them escaped, tumbling onto the table, but Cheryl was right there, dutifully scooping them back into the bowl like discarded peanut shells. I started to grunt, a wet, choked sound. My gag reflex was fighting me, trying to reject the chitinous husks that were sticking to the back of my tongue like shards of glass. I tried to swallow the third mouthful, but it got stuck. My airway was closing. I retched, I punched myself in the chest, I waved my hand frantically at Cheryl. She just stood there, watching. Her face was a mask of solemn, professional patience. The world started to tilt. Dizziness washed over me as the oxygen stopped reaching my brain. My last sight was Cheryl's polite smile before my face hit the laminate table and everything went black. I awoke with a start. I was sitting in my booth. The menu was in front of me. That familiar falling sensation, the one you get right before you wake up from a nightmare, was still echoing through my limbs. "What'll it be, hon?" Cheryl asked, pouring me a glass of water. She was already there. She never wastes time. "Just start me off at the top of the appetizers, Cheryl," I said, my voice a tired, hollow monotone. "We'll work our way down." I'm dead. I've been dead for a while now. It was the stunt food that did it. Those burgers stacked 3 stories high, the fries buried under layers of liquid cheese and processed meat. I lived for the gimmick. I thought it was funny until my heart gave out in a public park while I was walking my dog, Tater. One minute I was gasping for air on the grass and the next I was here. I tried to leave once. I ran for the front door and burst out into the light. The heat hit me like a physical blow. It was a shotgun blast to the soul. Beyond the small 4x4 patch of sidewalk in front of the restaurant, the world simply ended. The Applebee's was suspended over a gaping, roaring pit of orange fire. And the sound? It wasn't the fire roaring. It was the screaming. Thousands of people, a ladder of the damned, crawling over each other in a desperate, eternal struggle to escape a heat that sloughed the flesh right off their bones. If you fall, that's it. Done is done, Cheryl had said, pulling me back inside. So I stayed. This is my purgatory. I was a good person. I loved my wife, I volunteered, I went to church. But gluttony is a silent killer and apparently, a divine sin. My punishment is to experience the worst of what I did to my body over and over until I finished the menu. Hours, or maybe days, passed as I worked through the appetizers. The nausea hit me by the third plate of nachos. It's a constant rolling wave of acid reflux and bloating. I feel like I'm at the verge of vomiting with every bite, yet I never feel full enough to stop. All right, Cheryl, I said, wiping grease from my chin after the lava cake. Bring me the final dish. She looked at me, a small frown marring her face, then nodded. She returned with a covered tray. When she lifted the lid, my heart stopped again. A 7-foot rattlesnake was coiled on the silver platter. Its slitted eyes locked onto mine and the rattle began, a dry, hypnotic shaking that vibrated in my very teeth. Well, isn't that fun? Cheryl clapped. Go on now. It's gonna get cold. I stared at the snake. I've been terrified of snakes since I was a kid. I could see its muscles tensing, waiting for me to touch it so it could strike. My hand trembled as it hovered over the scales. I couldn't do it. I couldn't die again. Not this way. And then a thought hit me. A thought so simple it felt like a sin in itself. Cheryl? I can't, I whispered. She paused. Go on, hon. No, I said, my voice gaining a sudden strange strength. I'm full. I've already eaten so much. I should have quit a long time ago. I don't want any more. The snake let out one last, fierce rattle and then went still. Cheryl looked at me for a long time. Then a soft, genuine smile touched her lips. You know, she said, my ma used to say, the meal's only done when you're full. She reached into her apron. I'll go get you your check. I burst into laughter. It was a painful, hysterical sound. All this time I had been trying to beat the menu, thinking that finishing it was the only way out. I was trapped in a prison of my own appetite, too afraid to just say no. Cheryl returned and handed me a small slip of paper. I didn't even look at it. I stood up, my legs shaky, and hugged her. She patted my back as I cried into her uniform. I really hate Applebee's, I sobbed. I know, sweetie, she whispered. Let's get you upstairs. I'm writing this, or thinking this, as I walked toward the back of the kitchen, toward a staircase I never noticed before. Cheryl says it's better up there. She says the food is different. But as I look back at the dim yellow light of the dining room and the silent figures of Dick and Balls, I can't shake the feeling of dread. Even now, the smell of the grease follows me. I'm free of the booth, but my stomach still feels tight, and the back of my throat still stings from the hornets. They say heaven is a banquet, but after this, I don't think I ever want to eat again. I just hope upstairs isn't just another franchise. What if I get up there and Cheryl is already waiting with a water pitcher?